I just think the professionalism in our NBA league has diminished so much. And look, I like LeBron, I'm a fan of his, so forth and so on. But to walk out on the floor before a game with no shirt on and shoot, I mean, come on, man. Where we at? What we doing?
Yeah, I first saw this video last night when I was scrolling through my Twitter feed. The first thing I saw about it was in quotes on somebody's tweet. I didn't actually see the video first. And I was thinking, there's no way Isaiah Thomas was that pressed over LeBron James shooting around with his shirt off. Then I watched the video and I was like, wow. Isaiah Thomas really is this bothered by LeBron James practicing before the game with his shirt off. That rant was so left field and so uncalled for. It seemed ridiculous. It was ridiculous that Steve Smith agreed with him. The only two guys on the panel who looked a little bit iffy about what was being said was the moderator of the conversation and also Jalen Rose. From what I saw, he didn't really say much about what IT was going off about. So it was really ridiculous. My first thought about it was the hypocrisy of the whole thing. Now, before I get into what Isaiah Thomas said and critique some of the things that he was ranting about, I do want to start off and give him a ton of credit. Isaiah Thomas is one of the most iconic figures in the history of the game of basketball, not just as a player, but also as a coach and as an executive and also as a media guy. He has done so much and has left a major mark on the league, not just from a basketball standpoint, but also from a cultural standpoint. My first introduction to Isaiah Thomas was before I even became a fan of basketball, and it was through a movie that I saw on BT when I was younger called A Mother's Courage, which had Alfre Woodard in it, and also Wood Harris was in it. And it was basically a story about Isaiah Thomas and his upbringing in Chicago, some of the things that he was witnessing and going through, and also how his mother supported him through all of that. So an amazing story, and an amazing player and an amazing career. I'll never downplay what Isaiah Thomas was able to accomplish and also his life story. But with that being said, there were a lot of ridiculous hypocrisies in that rant. For one, I'm thinking you are Isaiah Thomas, who, again, great player, but your team in their prime were literally known as the bad boys. You guys were known as being the unprofessional team in the NBA, the staple unprofessional team in the NBA. You guys used to clothesline guys when they try to drive to the basket. You guys also used to consistently get into brawls with other teams for whatever reason. And I'm not saying I have an issue with it. I thought it was iconic. I thought it did serve its purpose for defining the 80s and how that era was like the tough era of basketball, whatever you think about it. I didn't have a problem with it, but for him to kind of lead that attack, also being a 30 for 30 about it, where they embraced their F everybody, tough guy mentality or whatever, for him to say all of that stuff and know that was his reality throughout the 80s, it just seemed extremely hypocritical. And it's not just him who will do that, but that's existing with a lot of different things where you'll have like an older generation of whatever, maybe if it's in music or if it's in other sports, well, they're hate on the younger generation for doing something that they would do themselves, maybe to a worse extent. I would argue that LeBron James shooting around before a game without his shirt on is much less harmful than hurting guys for trying to get to the basket while trying to get a layup. So that's the biggest thing. It's the contradictions in what he was saying. And also too, like, I've seen plenty of guys play basketball with their shirts off before, and it never came across my mind where I was like, this is unprofessional. Never. Whether it's just amateur guys or whether it's professional players, I've never thought that it was inappropriate for an athlete to practice without their shirt on. I just never grasped that as a major problem or major issue. That was the first time I'd ever seen anybody rant about a player shooting around with his shirt off. And what's so crazy is it was another former player doing the critiquing. So yeah, it was a ridiculous, uncalled for rant. Side note, NBA TV has given us some very good viral rants and moments so far this season. There was obviously like the preseason situation between Sam Mitchell and one of the NBA TV moderators that was really weird and out of place. And then there's this situation here. Ridiculous rant, very far left field. And I do think it speaks to a larger issue that we have going on with NBA discourse. I'm going to quote a Jay-Z line here from one of my favorite Jay-Z albums, 444. This was off the song Family Feud, where Jay-Z said, oh, you know what? Y'all gotta stop hating too. Like Tupac didn't wear a nose ring too. Nobody wins when the family feuds. What does he mean by that? The way I interpret it, the way I take it, is essentially him saying that when we have one generation trying to downplay or take credit away from another generation, it makes for something very toxic across the board. So in that particular situation, he was talking about hip hop, where one generation of hip hop artists would critique the younger generation, and it created this level of toxic discourse across the board where we're not really fully appreciating hip hop for what it is. That is very translatable to the NBA. What we have right now is we have a lot of generations hating on another generation, whether it's players or fans, whether it's older guys or younger guys. There is too much discourse going on right now where we have one generation trying to downplay the other one. We saw it with the older guys a ton. We see it with guys like Shaq and a ton of other players or media people or whatever the situation may be. But we'll also see it with younger fans or players as well, where they'll discount what guys were doing in previous eras, like in the 70s or 80s. They'll downplay the competition of certain players. So one thing you hear a lot is Michael Jordan played against plumbers as a way to kind of downplay the impact that he had on the game of basketball. I think that's so toxic because why are we at a point where as fans, we're downplaying these previous generations or these younger generations, which in my opinion are all equally as important, when we could instead be collectively appreciating the history and the impact of the sport as a whole? How can you call yourself a true fan of the game or a true student of the game if you can't find it to appreciate each era of basketball in context? So I'm not going to argue with people when they say that the 60s was relatively a less skilled era than what we see now. That can be true, but there's still a level of appreciation that we have to have for that particular era of basketball. What guys were able to do in context of the way the game is played, or what the time was and all of those things, we should appreciate it instead of downplaying it. Same for older generations. Why every time when we get an older player from especially the 90s or maybe the 80s, when they're talking about the younger generation, 9.9 out of 10 times, one of the most common things you hear is the league ain't as tough as it used to be. I saw that happen with so many guys. It wasn't just Isaiah Thomas, it isn't just Shaq, but it is way too common of a theme for an older player to get on some platform or whatever, and the first most common thing you see them say and talk about is how soft this generation is compared to their generation. We hear this all the time. People complain so much about how bad the league is today, right? We're talking about how people complain about the ratings, right? Or the quality of the sport. One of the biggest reasons is how we choose to talk about the game. And it's reflected through media. If we look at these podcasts, we look at these talk shows, they're going to choose topics that the audience wants to talk about. So if the audience is going to continuously get in these conversations where we are downplaying other generations, then of course, we're going to see that on a larger scale in the media. And that's going to have this really, really bad effect on the game itself. Nobody wants to watch something where people are not truly appreciating it, right? It's becoming very tough to consume the NBA because we have too many people who are too public and too open about their lack of appreciation of the game, whether it's former players or whether it's current guys critiquing older guys. There's just too much of that stuff coming around where you're wondering, how can I fall in love with the way this game is now if even the players or the people involved in it aren't giving the history of it enough credit and trying to downplay what certain guys have done? So I hope that made sense, but that's one of the biggest reasons why I think the league is in a really weird place right now. And I'm not saying that things won't get better, because they definitely will. I think we're gearing up for one of the better postseasons we've had in a long time. But if we want to change the state of the league, a lot of these conversations that we dive into have to change, right? We have to remove these overly critical conversations and these ridiculous hypothetical debates. We have to remove the lack of giving credit to other generations and other eras. I think it's going to be a massive driver behind the league getting back to a place where people are happy with its product. Again, there are other issues, there are other things at play. I'm not saying that the discourse is the reason behind it, but it is a big enough reason behind it all. And that starts with a lot of people, whether it's the fans, former players, whatever the case may be, not giving appreciation to previous eras and previous generations of hoopers isn't cool, and it actually rubs off the wrong way when we're talking about the overall quality of the sport and the discourse around it. So again, taking nothing away from IT and what he was able to accomplish with his NBA career, I just think that the way that he chose to talk about this is reflective of a much larger issue that's made the NBA and the discourse around the NBA extremely toxic.